Hi there, and welcome to the Hidden Pixels podcast, a show highlighting those gaming stories you might have missed on your first playthrough. I'm your host, Sebastian Nazaro. On this special episode, we're doing something a little different. In anticipation of our first dive into the Elder Scrolls, I sat down with Tom, the host of the Elder Scrolls Lorecast. Together, we talked about storytelling, gaming communities, and a whole lot of Elder Scrolls. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll jump back on after the talk to wrap up. So let's dive in.
Hey adventurers, this is Tom, your host, or robots, as usual. Welcome to the show. I have a very special episode this week with somebody I've been talking with, another new and noteworthy podcast person from the Hidden Pixels podcast. I have Sebastian here to talk stories in video games and specifically Elder Scrolls. Sebastian, welcome. How's it going?
Hey, going good, Tom. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, it was really nice to hear from you. You kind of reached out a little while ago and said, "Hey, I've been doing some video game stuff with Fallout and Elder Scrolls, and I've got some story ideas, and you wanted to hear some of my ideas." And then we continued talking a little bit and decided it'd be really kind of cool to have each other on in order to talk video game stuff, because that's what we do. So thanks for reaching out.
No problem at all. Yeah, I think the two shows are pretty complementary. So with your deep dive and me telling kind of the narrative of different games. I mean, we've had a Fallout episode as our first episode, and coming up next, we have our this one is our Skyrim Elder Scrolls episode. So
Right. And you've gone into things like Mario and some of the more like traditional gamey type console-y games, and then you've also done some of the deeper stuff that has like much deeper lore, like Fallout and Elder Scrolls. Can you explain to the audience, at least my audience, because we're sharing this episode on both streams, what brought up this idea, and what are your episodes actually like?
So it all started kind of with I've always had this age-old debate with my buddy Matt, and so basically, we're both gamers. We both have loved video games since we were young. But he's always been a multiplayer guy. He's always been PvP. He needs to be playing another human to make it like fun and worthwhile. He's a very competitive guy. Whereas me, it's always been about the story. It's always been about finding like the cool, interesting characters, the different events happening in the world, and what's been happening. Where are these people living? What are these people doing? So that has really developed farther, like as I grew up with games and finding more games such as the Elder Scrolls, such as Fallout. I keep exploring, trying to get deeper and deeper into it. And now with the show, I've been trying to find those smaller, like I call them hidden stories that are like on the edge of the map. They're not going to be your main storyline. They're not going to be your main quest, but they're going to be those little ones that you don't necessarily need to get to finish the game, but that you, once you do get there, you're like, wow, like the developers like really hid something special over here, and like not that many people are going to experience it. So
yeah, they took the time to put this here. They actually, maybe only 5% of the audience actually sees this or even knows that it's here, but they took the time to do it.
Right. So we should bring to light those stories and try to give those a bigger audience, just so everybody can experience them, or more people can experience them. I know I put how many hours, dozens upon dozens of hours into Skyrim or The Witcher 3 or different huge RPG games, and I know I'm missing content. And all the content that I do experience is so good that I just like to know that there are stories out there that I haven't gotten to is like it's sad a little bit. So to get those stories out to light, to get those to a bigger audience, and so more people can experience them. That's just what it's about. And some of them are like you said, like Mario or Yoshi. They're fun. Just these backstories you didn't know about characters that are part of their lore, but you know them so well, or you think you know them so well. But did you know a few side stories about them? So just trying to bring all that.
There's always more. Oh,
exactly.
Yeah, cool. Totally. That's one of the reasons why, you're kind of inspiring me to talk a little bit too, because that's one of the reasons why I started my shows, was to give myself, I can sit down and pour through wikis and articles and blog posts and those kinds of things about this content on my own. But if I'm doing a regular show, I'm going to dive deeper and more carefully into the content in a way to explain it to other people than I would just reading it myself.
Yeah, you're actually learning it. You're appreciating it that much more by actually having the audience and being able to share it with others. So
yeah, totally. Well, very
nice.
cool. Yeah,
thanks. Yeah, it's and your shows are kind of, as I said before, they're kind of complementary. Whereas I was thinking earlier today, I was like, my show is kind of like the tapas or like the tasting course of these games, where yours is like that entree. Yours is that deep dive, that rich meal that you can really dig into. So it's I think they really work well together.
Yeah, you're like, I'll take the sampler, or I'll take what's the flight of beers where you get all like the little glasses.
Yeah. That's what I'm the brewery handing those out. You're like the rich IPA that like you just want to savor for a little while.
Yeah.
That's
very
great.
cool. That's a really neat idea. So to your audience, I can expand a little bit on that. I started out used to do Dungeons and Dragons show, and that was it was a lot of fun, but the quality wasn't as high as I had hoped, because I had to get a lot of people together and corral cats and different microphones and all that kind of stuff. But right at about the beginning of the year, in early January, I decided to start the Fallout Lorecast. And Fallout 76 had come out, and there was a lot of controversy around, is it a good game? Is it not a good game? Is it going to be a good game? That kind of stuff.
Is it working?
What was that?
Is it working properly?
Is it working properly? Yeah. Are there any bugs?
Yeah.
And I was like, that's not the point of these games, is to argue about this. And if we know Bethesda, there's always going to be some bugs, but at some point this game is going to be more than what it is right now. And when you actually dive into it, there are some really interesting nuggets of lore and story, even though there's no NPCs, because the NPCs all previously existed in the world. And you come to find out all sorts of things about like the people and what they were doing, even just days before you left your vault, and what happened to them. And so it started me down this path of like, there's a lot of really good content in here. And I have a lot of questions too about things that I still don't know about. So I was just kind of getting the itch, and I was like, well, why don't I just start a show and I'll just start talking about this stuff? And originally thought about getting some of the other people together, but I ended up just doing it on my own, and it turned into this thing, and people have been it's really resonated. So that expanded. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Fallout's one of my favorite series. So I think that kind of seeing that you had that show is just like the deep dives you do into each one. It's fantastic. It's a great crash course in every single topic.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I started with like the Great War and the bombs dropping. And then I've done a series on each of the different vaults, and then each of like the main factions and kind of their history. And one of the things that's so cool about Fallout is that most of the games take place hundreds of years later. So you're having to piece together all the things that happened in the past and why the world is the way it is. So there's a lot of stuff to kind of fill in.
Yeah, I would find myself every once in a while, like when I get the itch for Fallout again, I find myself on the timeline on the Wikipedia, just like going through and being like, all this stuff happened, and like it's not even like it might be in one terminal in the game. So to like find those, it's just like it's so exciting to be like, oh, there's this other thing that's happening, or it happened hundreds of years ago, and that's why this happened. So just like piecing it all together, that's like it's like a huge puzzle to put together, and it's so satisfying to do so.
Right. And I find that the audience really appreciates somebody being able to say, like, this is what happened on this date. It's related to this group and these people and this individual, and this is why it happened. And then they go, and then you can say things like, so when you experienced this in Fallout New Vegas, that's what that was about. And then people were like, whoa, that makes sense. Yeah. Oh, I get it now.
There's a lot more significance to that. No, now I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm doing something similar with Elder Scrolls. That show was going well, and I was like, these are my two loves. Fallout and Elder Scrolls are probably my top two gaming franchises. So I was like, really like to, and it's almost just like this selfish need to make myself learn more stuff.
Right.
like,
Yeah.
like
To learn it better. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm enjoying making this Fallout show, so I just want to dig into this other one. So I launched that as well, and it's been growing. It's actually growing even faster. It's not bigger yet in volume of downloads or anything, but it's growing faster than the Fallout one did. And I have a feeling it's probably because there's a crossover audience and some of that going on too.
Sure, but even still, like the audience, it seems like you're not just doing the podcast though. I think you have a group on, you have the group on Discord, and you have a group in the game itself for Elder Scrolls, right?
Yeah, well, I actually joined. There's another podcast called the Lore Seekers podcast, and they started their own guild. So I've joined their guild and have been questing with them and stuff. And there's a lot of people on the Discord, and I've got some channels for people to kind of group up and talk and hang out or post stuff. And so you'll see, you're in the Discord now, so you can pop back in and you'll see conversations and things. But one of the cool things about Elder Scrolls Online is that you can actually join up to like 5 different guilds. So I've been this is one of the ideas I've been kicking around, and I think I'll throw it out there to the people in the Discord maybe even later tonight. But this idea of like, maybe we should start our own guild too, because I can still be a part of the Lore Seekers Guild, but we could have our own guild and kind of do our own guild events and those kinds of things. So
definitely, yeah. It's just about building that community, having another place for everybody just to enjoy the game, enjoy the lore, and get that background when they can.
Yep. And then I also like to stream on Twitch at twitch.tv/R0b0ts Radio. R0b0ts Radio is like the brand for the shows.
Right.
So people, I don't have a big following on Twitch, but it's fun for people to pop in and talk lore stuff or just goof around about the game you're playing. So yeah,
that's great. Yeah. It seems like you're seeing the R0b0ts Radio everywhere, seeing it on Twitch, seeing it on Twitter. You guys you have a huge presence there. So it's as somebody who's just starting, this is first ever podcast, first ever kind of content I'm producing and making. It's inspiring to see all these other paths that it could take, and all these other things that you can do to get a community and kind of reach out to people and connect with people with these stories or the games. So.
Oh yeah. And the stories. And I think one of the things you'll know is and you probably already realized this, but the stories really resonate with people. And you described how for you, the games, it wasn't so much about the gameplay, it was about the stories. Yeah. And there is an entire community where that's what resonates with them about video games or about media in general. And, I would recommend, really go out there and find the people in the Twitterverse who like identify themselves as that tribe or whatever you want to call it.
The story seekers, the book lovers, like that kind of group
they're out there and they're having conversations, and chances are they would love to know about your show because they just want to consume that content, So it's really neat. There's the world being able to reach across all these boundaries using the internet in order to just nerd over things that you enjoy with other people who have the same interest. It's so cool.
It's insane. Yeah. I can talk till I'm blue in the face to some of my friends and they're just like, oh, that's nice. But now going out and going on Twitter, going on Instagram and seeing everybody getting excited about it. It's fun. It's encouraging to see that there are these people out there. My people are out there.
Yeah. And, I did notice your show on the New and Noteworthy, and you've been getting some really great reviews. And actually, I was very impressed that you made it into the New and Noteworthy as quickly as you did. You only had a few episodes up when I noticed you on there. So I don't know, you've been doing something right from the beginning, because it's typically pretty tough to get into that section of iTunes. You have to get enough downloads and enough positive feedback in order for them to even consider you.
Yeah, I was very pleasantly surprised, I'll say, because there was no expectation of anything coming from it, but it's kind of taken off a little bit. I'm starting to see people reaching out and now actually like talking about the episodes, which is nice. But it's just been trying to reach out, trying to find, as you said, find that community, and trying to think of different ways that I could get people to understand what the show's about and understand that it is something a little different. It's not just a couple of guys talking about the game, but
it's not just another video game chat show.
Exactly. It's which are fun, but at the same time, it's something a little different, trying something a little new with the narratives. One of the favorite podcasts that I listen to is Lore, which does like the folklore. And so I was like, well, there's so much of that in video games as well. Like, why don't Why doesn't somebody do that? And I looked around and didn't see anything. And so I was like, oh, well, I could do that. Like, let's try it.
Yeah. I think you and I were kind of jiving on the same. Man, this sounds like hippie language or something. I'm not old enough by any means to be a hippie, but like jiving on the same wavelength, dude, or man, or whatever. But yeah, I find that like with my show, I want to do something kind of similar to that, and then also in the vein of some of these like history shows, some of the history podcasts. So it's, you know, a little bit between storytelling and teaching of content. You know, like just somewhere in the middle of that.
What drove me towards your show? I saw it in the new and noteworthy section, but also there was a couple of things that really stood out to me. Not to like continue to pat you on the back, but it really did. It really did. But I guess it's the place for it. So it really stood out to me that how accessible your show is. Like there are some shows that I did look into for Fallout and the Elder Scrolls. The Elder Scrolls, I'm not. I wrote the story today and I looked up the lore for that, but I'm not well versed in Elder Scrolls lore or as much as I want to.
Obtuse, I guess you could say.
It's dense. It is thick. So trying to get into that is tough, but your show makes it so accessible. You're starting from the beginning and going through piece by piece. It's almost like a class. It's for somebody who's a dummy like me, it feels very welcoming to come in and very accessible to just pop on an episode, and I can very easily understand where you're coming from and where it's going and follow right along. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it was really it's really what stood out to me about your show and why it was a little different. And the other thing was, sorry, I lost train of thought for a second. The other thing is the community aspect. You're really, I think you said on your first episode, you really want to reach out to this community, build this community, just like we've been saying. And that's what it's about. It's about reaching out to other people and trying to just have these discussions, using it as kind of the segue into the discussions rather than just telling people this is the lore, this is how it is. It's not so cut and dry, especially with these games. So to be open to that, it was a very welcoming introduction to the world of Elder Scrolls.
well, thanks. And you're right. Both of these games, Fallout and Elder Scrolls, have a certain fogginess about the past and what has actually happened.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
They both have that kind of trying to piece together a world that existed before your time quality.
That looking back.
That looking back thing. And I've always been a fan of history, and I studied, and I've mentioned this on my show before. I have a degree in philosophy and a degree in religious studies, so I studied deep thoughts from every perspective.
Wow, yeah.
And there's something about that in our real world too. Like most people don't think about it that way, but really the things that we think to be true about the past are all pieced together based on all sorts of different information sources. And depending on even what period of time you lived, you had a different perspective of what happened in the past. I mean, even up until just, recent times, like even a few decades ago, we've come across new information that fills in the past and, in lots of different ways. So it's actually way more realistic in a sense than a fictitious world where everything's black and white and everything's cut and dry and you know exactly the way things happened, because that's just not how it works in the real world. Right.
It makes it so much more realistic, and it gives so much more meat to these worlds that things are a little foggy. So and be able to sift through it is it's challenging, but it's rewarding when you finally like, all right, like I think this is what it is, and then finding something else and you're like, oh well, maybe not. Now these guys are disagreeing with these guys, and it's a whole new adventure once you're going through those wikis.
I enjoy there's a basic human need for black and white. You want things to be this way or that way, and once you feel like you know something, you don't want it to be challenged, especially if you identify yourself with that thing. But I've learned to really enjoy and kind of I don't know what the right word is, put my arms around and bring into myself this feeling of like wading through the gray, this idea of just holding different ideas floating in the air, and sometimes certain ideas weigh a little bit more and sometimes the other ideas weigh a little bit more, but allowing that to just kind of be and not have to come to a conclusion, just to know the knowledge about the possibilities. And I find that so much more enjoyable than feeling like you have a conclusion about things, because it's like a mystery. That's why mysteries are interesting. That's why TV shows like Lost are so much better in the first few seasons than they are at the end, because there's infinite possibility as to what can be happening. But once it's all wrapped up and you know all the stuff, you're like, I guess that was all right.
Right, because it's now their idea, the black and white of what actually happened.
Right.
And instead of like you said, embracing that uncertainty, embracing that knowing that there are other possibilities out there is exciting. Like, you have your ideas, but there could be a few other things that you just don't know that could come out and change the whole game. And that's that unknown, that excitement of what's to come is what makes anything exciting, any kind of media exciting, and these games do it perfectly. So
yeah, totally. So I know coming up in your next episode, you have a story from the Elder Scrolls that you pulled up, and I'm going to recommend to my audience, guys, go. I'm not going to plug it into this episode of the show because I want to release this early enough for you guys to get a hold of this and listen to it for this week. But coming up, Saturday, probably.
It will probably be up next Friday, actually.
Next Friday. Okay, so by next Friday, on that episode of your show, you're going to have a Skyrim story, one of the ones that you picked specifically for your show to go into in your style, in your way. And so I would recommend to my audience, go check that out. And if you're into any of these other games, check out the other episodes too, because it's like you explained, this is a very kind of different way to come at video game podcast. And if you're into the way I go over stuff, then I think this is going to resonate with you too. It's from that story perspective. So that being said, why what did you pick to do for Elder Scrolls, and what can you tell us about it without ruining too much of the story?
So I was going through, Skyrim's been the main game I played in the series. Like I said, I'm not super well versed in it, but I know Skyrim decently well. And I've always been impacted. Every time I get back to the game, I'm impacted by the companions, and those quest lines with the companions and the Skyforge and everything that's happening at Whiterun. So I decided to take a little bit of a deeper dive into that. And I found out that it's all tied to the coming of the men over from now I'm blanking on the continent that they came from. So it's Adelan,
Akavira,
or I think
Atmora. No, wait a minute. I'm sorry. Yeah, Atmora.
Oh, I
the one to the north. Yeah, Atmora.
Yeah. There it is. Yes. Atmora. Yeah.
Sorry.
So
there's these other continents that are outside of Tamriel, and they all have these like a something vowel.
Right.
So
they're all
but
very similar.
Atmora. It's the one to the north. Yeah.
Atmora. So I realized that it is all tied into the men coming in from Atmora, and the first men coming to Tamriel and to Skyrim and meeting the snow elves and that kind of relationship. And so I just kept digging in, and it just kept getting better and better, like these stories do. And so I realized that the main player who founded Whiterun is Jeek of the River. I think it's Jeek. And he has a whole story where he broke off from the main companions, the 500 companions, and kind of led his own men down to Whiterun, or where Whiterun would be, and founded and had a bunch of different adventures going down there. So I won't go too much into it because that's the crux of the story.
Don't want to spoil it.
Yeah, exactly. But
for my audience, who most of them have probably played Skyrim and are very familiar with the companions and all that stuff, this eventually connects back through to their experience in Skyrim.
Yeah, so eventually the story will connect, and it'll connect to the finding of Whiterun and the companions nowadays, quote unquote, in Skyrim.
Right.
And they're kind of finding in the fourth era. There you go. And they're how they were found and where their origins are from. So it's all kind of connected to that. It's what we were talking about how there's always something in the past that has happened to the people that you meet in the present day game. And this is kind of one of those backstories to the companions. So I think it's interesting. I think it's it has a few a few surprises for people who don't know, who aren't too well versed into it. But I think it's fun as a story, even if you do know it. Like I said, I tell it as like a narrative. So there are characters, there are all the dialogue going back and forth. And I think it will be pretty exciting. So I'm excited about it. So I think your audience would like it. My audience would like it too.
Yeah. And there's characters like Ysgramor, who might sound familiar if you played Skyrim. That name comes up. The 500 companions, that name comes up. Places like Sarthal. So yeah, and of course the snow elves, which are a big part of Skyrim, and trying to figure out what happened to them and where they went, and if any are still alive.
It's quite a few snow elves in the story, so you get to experience them once again.
Yeah, they used to own, but they used to be the predominant culture of that land. So yeah, very cool. A good choice too. The way it connects back to Skyrim, and one of those games that has now sold multi-million copies, and everybody owns at least three copies of the game.
Yeah, different platforms, playing on the subway on your Switch. Yeah,
you can play it on your electronic refrigerator screen. And
yeah. So
very cool.
We'll see.
Awesome.
And
I picked out a
you have a story coming out as well for this episode.
Yeah, well, there was, you were talking about relaying an interesting story that you found in Elder Scrolls lore, and there's one that so let me give you some background for people who haven't been listening to my show. I start out Elder Scrolls Lorecast talking about the kind of creation of the world and who you could call them gods, the Aedra and the Daedra are, and I've been going through a series more recently where I've been going alphabetically through the different Daedra, the Daedric princes. And one of my favorite Daedric princes is Sheogorath. And he is you could call him the god of madness. And I'm not going to go too much into his origin or the connections. Excuse me. I had a blizzard tonight, and now I've got
nice.
like ice cream burps. So I'm not going to go too much into the background. That's a whole episode unto itself. But there is this wonderful quest called Sheogorath. And in the quest, you are helping to bring about the Kashara prophecy. The Kashara prophecy is, I'm going to read the wiki here, because oftentimes I'll relate directly from the content that I can find. It says in the fandom.com Elder Scrolls wiki, the Kashara prophecy is a prediction told by Ribasa's great-great-great-grandfather Kashara that the world will end. The Khajiit of Border Watch all believe that the prophecy will one day come to pass, but they do not know when. The Khajiit are for anybody who doesn't know, are the cat people race. And so this story brings together Sheogorath, who's the crazy cat in their pantheon, and then the cat people, who are some of my favorite, one of my favorite races in the game. And it goes on and says, the prophecy foretells the 3 signs that will mark the end of the world. First, rats will swarm the town. So the character is quested to make rats swarm the town, right? To make these Khajiit go, oh, this seems like the beginning of this prophecy. And then the second, all the town's livestock will mysteriously die. So that becomes another thing. And then once you've accomplished the first 2 things, Sheogorath doesn't tell you what the third sign is. The third and final sign of the plague of fear. So the player is tasked with waiting until Sheogorath congratulates the player and tells them to wait in the center of town and watch the sky. Suddenly the sky turns red and is raining flaming dog as the people run around in fear as they fall. So the final sign of the prophecy is flaming fire dogs falling out of the sky, which is so good.
At least he took care of that part for you, right? Like, at least you didn't have to find the dogs.
Who has this very thick kind of Scottish accent. He says, good times. I hope you had as much fun as I did. Here, take this. It's a fun little toy. Now go away before I kill you. Like, that's how it ends. So messed up. So you do.
Sorry, so messed up. But you can't. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So you go through all this.
You can't expect anything less from him, though.
Who knows what reason, and that's the reason. So he can play this prank on the town and make them think the world is ending and drop a bunch of flaming dogs on them. So anyway.
That's great. That's great. It's and that's the kind of like wackiness that you'll see sometimes. The it sounds like very much like
Yes.
Bethesda
Yes.
humor that you'll see. You'll see it in Fallout a lot too, where it's just like this wacky like Easter
Right.
egg
Yeah.
that
The
you're kind of
twist at
like,
the end
wait,
is like,
what?
really?
That's how it ends.
I was talking about this with a guest I had on the Fallout Lorecast this week
Yeah.
about the Fallout games, and it's true for Elder Scrolls too. Is that the Fallout games are like this very
Mhm.
dark wasteland where terrible things happen, and then also really silly at the same time. And Elder Scrolls is the same way. It's like
Oh,
the
yeah.
like if you
It's
live
like
a not super terrible life and die quickly, then that was probably a good life because most people you're doing okay. Most people die terribly.
you're doing okay.
But it's also super wacky, like flaming dogs falling out of the sky, you know? Right,
Or
right.
finding Indiana Jones in a fridge in New Vegas. It's like all those like crazy things that you'll
Yeah,
see
yeah.
that
And I think
just
that's
make you
maybe
do
why
a
I like
double
those
take. It's
games
like,
so
wait
much
a
is that
minute.
they're kind of the sum of the two things that I like. I really enjoy the dark, really serious kind of scary type stuff. You know, like I'm one of those people who like, you know,
Mhm.
Halloween's my favorite holiday because it's the spooky one, you know. But then it's also the wacky one. It's
Right.
also the one where you dress up like a
Yeah.
cowboy and go to a party, you know?
Right. When you stop and think about it,
Right.
it's like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
wait, what are we doing? What? It's almost like
Hmm.
it's the only way to cope with the darkness. Like if imagine these kind of games without that kind of wacky like tinge to them, and they'd just be so daunting and so like just drag
Yeah.
almost because everything's so heavy and dark. But like by adding that humor, by adding even like going to Fallout, like even with that the
Uh-huh.
1950s soundtrack, you can have that playing in the background while you're going through a bunker and fighting these huge
Right.
super mutant monsters or mole rats, and you're like, this is kind of
Yeah,
weird,
yeah. It's this
but
wonderful
it works.
juxtaposition
Somehow it
between
works.
like, you know, a romantic jazz ballad playing in the background while you're blowing the heads off of super mutants. Yeah, yeah. Totally, totally great. So awesome, awesome. Well,
Exactly.
I've read your script, but I can't wait to hear your rendition of it on your show. So I will be looking forward to downloading that next Friday. So that date for anybody who wants to know an actual date is the 19th of April. And this show should be, I'm going to hopefully knock this out tonight. So, but I guess that doesn't matter if you're already listening to the show because you'll be like, well, whatever. I'm already listening to it. Time is weird in podcast land. Um, but thank you so much for
Really
joining me.
is.
This has been a lot of fun. And I would love to talk more about these games if ever you decide to revisit them in your show, come back around to some other stories and things. So thanks so much.
I'm sure we will. There's just so many stories in these games that I do not doubt we'll come back to them. It's kind of, I have to kind of restrict myself from keep going back to them because there's so many good stories. But thank you so much for having me on the show. And obviously anybody from my show who's hearing
Mhm.
this, go listen both R0b0ts Radio shows, Fallout Lorecast and
Right.
Elder
And your
Scrolls
show again
Lorecast.
is
Like
the
they
Hidden Pixels
are
podcast.
amazing
And
deep
if
dives.
somebody wanted to get a hold of
So,
you, how would they reach out?
we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. You can leave a message on any of those. They're all Hidden Pixels Podcast. And then our email is hiddenpixelspodcast@gmail.com.
Awesome.
So
Awesome.
it's
And
simple.
you can
Once
get
you
a hold
remember
of
the name,
me
you got it.
yeah, you can get a hold of me either Fallout
And for
Lorecast at
yourself,
gmail.com,
yeah.
Elder Scrolls Lorecast at gmail.com. You can go to robotsradio.net where you can see the different shows and access all the stuff I have on there. And then also on Twitter, Elder or Fallout at Fallout, excuse me, at Fallout Lorecast or at ESO Lorecast because Elder Scrolls Lorecast was too long. So people play Elder Scrolls Online, so ESO Lorecast. But yeah, and I love to hear feedback like we mentioned before. I love when people write or add something to a story or something I didn't know, and they're like, "Hey, did you know this?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't. Thanks for sharing that." And sometimes I'll even highlight that stuff on the show on the next episode if something is really notable.
Yeah, I'm sure I missed a few things in this story, so I can't wait for people to point those out.
Yeah, I didn't go very specific. Oh, in
Yeah,
your
yeah.
story, yeah, I didn't go very specifically through mine because it's one of those things that you play through as an adventure in the game. So, but yeah, no, I'm sure yours seems pretty thorough. But yeah, it would be interesting to know what other little pieces of lore kind of connect
Definitely.
into it and things. So there's always more
Always
detail.
keep going.
There's just always a little bit more.
Just keep digging.
Yeah.
All right.
So
well, thanks, Tom.
Cool. Well, thanks, Sebastian, and look forward to hearing your show.
Alright, just Sebastian here again. I want to give a huge thank you to Tom for letting me join his show for an episode. If you have any interest in the Elder Scrolls, go check out his show, the Elder Scrolls Lorecast. Or, if you're like me and Fallout is more your style, he's got a show for that too, the Fallout Lorecast. Both dive deep into the lore and legends found throughout those game series. So make sure you subscribe to the shows and support R0b0ts Radio. As for us, look for the whole story of Jeek and the founding of Whiterun later this week. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all then. Today's show was written, recorded, and produced by me, Sebastian Azar. All sources used today can be found in the episode details on our website, hiddenpixelspodcast.com. Episodes are available now on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. If you like what you heard, or even if you didn't, please subscribe and leave us a review. And follow us on Facebook at Hidden Pixels Podcast and Twitter at Hidden Pixels Pod. We also just released a brand spanking new Instagram account at Hidden Pixels Podcast, so check that out as well. And of course, thanks for listening.